New reporting from the Daily Poster's Andrew Perez finds corporate lobbying groups like the Business Roundtable, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce are pressing the Biden administration not to reform the Supreme Court. This after President Joe Biden's push to set up a commission to consider court reform options like expanding the court. Senior editor and reporter at the Daily Poster, Andrew Perez, joins us now to discuss. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And so, Andrew, at this point, politically speaking, over the next foreseeable future, it does seem like packing the Supreme Court isn't on the table. There are, if they overturn Roe, I expect we could get a push back in that direction. But there's also a big push to kind of expand the circuit court and expand the district courts. Where does the Chamber of Commerce and its allies, come down on that effort, and why are they so hostile to it?
I think these groups are pushing to keep the courts as they are. I think you're correct that there is not really a push from Democrats to reform the court, right? This Biden commission is not really considering expanding the court. I think at best they might consider term limits for justices, and I'm not really sure how that would affect the Supreme Court now.
That seems like a really good idea. I mean, that's one thing that I wonder is why are we not discussing more about term limits rather than expanding the court? When you expand the court, I mean, I think one of the fears that a lot of Democrats would have, and one of my own fears, is if you expand it and pack it now, then when Republicans get in power, they're going to expand it and pack it some more, and it kind of just becomes this, this cycle of we're just going to try to get ourselves into power. But one thing that I think would do some good is possibly saying, look, you have to retire. Once you hit 70, 72 years old or something, you have to retire. And maybe even putting another limitation on it, because one of the fears that I think a lot of people have with retirement is then it would kind of become the revolving door, like what we see with Congress, where they go and they move to K Street and they start lobbying. And you don't want justices to be thinking of their career when they're ruling on very prominent and important matters. And so perhaps also putting a caveat on them of, look, if you're going to accept the Supreme Court nomination, when you retire, you retire. You go off into the sunset. You don't get to go and become a lobbyist or sit on the board of some, big company. Is that being discussed at all?
I guess I can't really say to the extent that's being discussed. I think really most of these proposals to reform the court are not going to happen right now, right? Like there's not a whole lot of political will within the Democratic Party to change the courts, even as it becomes increasingly reactionary. Has not really happened. And that's something this piece looks at is that the corporate lobbying groups are fighting to make sure that this court stays the same, that it continues to be a star chamber for big business.
Will that argument get harder to make if Roe v. Wade is gotten rid of, the outcome of the current the case before the court, where they're giving the conservative justices are giving every indication, and they constitute a majority, that they're interested, potentially more than potentially interested in undoing that precedent and letting states set more restrictive abortion laws?
Yeah, I would say it could definitely become a bigger issue then. As it stands, 48 Senate Democrats have all signed on to legislation to codify Roe v. Wade and protect it. And, they could also then preempt state, restrictive state abortion laws. But there are two Democratic senators who have not signed on to that, and that is Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Bob Casey in Pennsylvania. Obviously, there are two Republican senators who have talked about supporting a woman's right to choose, but it's not really clear that either Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski are going to get behind some push to modify the court if there indeed is any kind of push at all from Senate Democrats to do so.
What kind of form has this lobbying campaign taken, and how serious is this issue for them in the pantheon of the rest of their agenda?
Yeah, well, I'd say it's pretty quiet, right? Like we found these comments in regulatory comments submitted to the Biden Commission on Supreme Court reform. So they're regulatory comments. Most people do not read them, but it's something the administration has probably definitely seen. And some of the arguments are pretty hilarious, honestly. Yeah, the Business Roundtable, which represents CEOs is saying that it would actually harm the economy to add court seats. The National Federation of Independent Businesses is making kind of a similar argument that a free market economy requires, the courts to be independent and legitimate. And the U.S. Chamber is saying that the American people really value the rule of law, and that's why we have to keep the court the way it is.
Even if they expanded it, nothing's really going to change. I mean, okay, so the courts, people are really upset about the courts when they're making social change, social issues. But when it comes to business, they're very pro-business. They've always been really pro-business, whether they be appointed by the left or the right. It doesn't seem to matter. So even if they expanded the Supreme Court, what do these lobbying groups, what do they care? I mean, it just seems like they would appoint justices that maybe they're liberal socially, but they're still going to be pro-business at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that the court has been pro-business. Even the liberal justices have often sided with big business interests, But I think right now it's maybe the degree to which it is a corporate star chamber. I think the Supreme Court during its most recent term has ruled with the U.S. Chamber 83% of the time. It's a new record. It's up from 70% a few years ago. So while it was already working to serve business interests, not really protecting shareholders, it's become a much bigger issue now.
Right. Well, Andrew, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we will have more Rising right after this.